Hi kids, Jake Rivers here. If you're joining us for the very first time, we're really glad you're here because we prepared some amazing online experiences just for you kids. If you're a preschooler, do you like getting gifts? Because today in the Wonder Clubhouse, we're going to hear a story about how God is the one who always gives us the best gifts. You don't want to miss it. And if you're between kindergarten and grade 3, do you ever find that it's really hard to be thankful? In today's story, we're going to learn how we can be grateful even when it feels like we're missing out. And if you're in the grade 4 to 5 range, check out the So and So Show, where our friends John and Brandon are going to show us some amazing things, like how to write a thank you note in a bowl of cereal. To all the grown-ups, if you're watching this on Facebook, you can find the link to all these videos in the post right above this one. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can find those links in the description below. However you're joining us today, we're really glad you're here and we hope you enjoy.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to ERCF Online Services. My name is Crystal, and I am so happy to have you joining us this morning. Pastor Jim is continuing his Storytime sermon series this week with The Story We've Believed. You're not going to want to miss it. All right, now let's enter into a time of worship together.
Heaven thundered and the world was born. Life begins and ends in the dust you formed. Faith commanded and the mountains moved. Fear is losing ground to our hope in you. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Freedom conquered, all our chains undone. With sin defeated, Jesus is overcome. Mercy triumphed when the third day dawned, and darkness was denied when the storm was gone. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Unstoppable God, let your glory go on and on. Impossible things in your name, they shall be done. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable, and we'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable, and we'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Nothing shall be impossible. Your kingdom reigns unstoppable, and we'll shout your praise forevermore. Jesus, our God, unstoppable. Unstoppable.
Hi, everybody. We are talking about story time, and it's our third installment. And last time we covered all of the different aspects of stories and how God has actually wired us psychologically and in terms of the hardwiring of our brain and physiologically in order to just grasp and hold on to stories. And stories have such a power and an influence in our life. It's no wonder that the Bible tells us, Matthew chapter 13, that Jesus wouldn't teach the crowds at all without using parables or stories. Kids love having stories read to them by their parents, and as we open up the books and read the stories, we've got values that are portrayed to us. We've got themes and narratives, and as kids we learn how to live and the things that we should be pursuing. We have the definition and the description of what a good life should be. Well, we talk about stories from a book, but we also talk about stories in a life, and we love to hear one another's stories. So our lives have themes and lessons to pass on to one another. In our lives, we talk about what we are pursuing and what we have subscribed to and the things that we think life should be about. Stepping back even further, in the culture around us, we have stories that come to us all of the time. And again, they define for us what should the good life look like. Well, culture is a concept a little bit more difficult to understand than stories, but essentially a culture is a system of attitudes and beliefs and values. So not just my individual attitudes, beliefs, and values, but when everyone around me has the same attitudes and beliefs and values, then they are shared among us. And actually, when there is a culture that's sharing attitudes, beliefs, and values, we end up teaching them to one another, and so they are learned. The kids grow up, and all of the things that we believe are passed on to them. So when we have a society that has learned and shared systems of attitudes, beliefs, and values, we call that a culture. And at that point in time, our culture becomes a little bit like my glasses. Then the culture becomes something that changes my perception of what I see, what I feel, and dictates my behavior. So a culture then is a shared and learned system of attitudes, beliefs, and values that determine my perception and then my behaviors. Well, culture comes to us in basically 7 different ways. They are, listing them would be arts and business, education, family, government, media, and religion. Now, of those 7, some are so much bigger and more influential than the others. The first would be arts. Now, when we talk about arts, we also mean entertainment and sports. The world of entertainment is huge in defining and passing on values to everyone in the culture. And perhaps even bigger than that, even more influential, would have to be media. Now, 50 years ago, mass media was like television and radio, perhaps newspapers and books. Nowadays, it is almost entirely the screens that we look at every day. We're talking about multiple social media platforms, and the influence that comes to us through our screens, through the digital world, is crazy. It's unbelievable, and it changes the way we think and what we do. Well, we talked briefly last time about being exiles in Babylon. Whoa. What are we talking about, exiles in Babylon? Okay, let's stop for a moment, and we need our map again. So pulling up the map, we have a very quick geography, history, and Bible lesson. In 586 BC, we had the Jews in the Jerusalem area, in the bottom part of the nation, Judah, taken captive in 3 separate waves by King Nebuchadnezzar. If you hadn't heard the story, you gotta look it up. What happened was, these Jews, the best and the brightest, a lot of children, a lot of young people, were brought all the way to Babylon. And what happened in Babylon is that their identity was crushed. Their hope of ever leaving was decimated. Their own personal language and their own personal culture was just cruelly crushed by the Babylonians. What happened was, there in Babylon, they were given Babylonian names. They were told that they had to speak the Babylonian language. They were educated in the Babylonian education system. The whole culture was foreign to them. They were totally immersed in the Babylonian culture. The center of the Jewish life was the sacrificial religious system. God at the center of it all. The temple was gone. The sacrificial system was gone. They were away from their homeland, and they were now totally immersed in the culture around them, and they became just like the Babylonians. And that was the whole idea. Free slave labor for some, for most, and for the best and the brightest, they were educated and moved into positions of authority and influence, and they were part of the administration and the system of leadership in the Babylonian culture. Okay, back to exiles in Babylon. An exile is a person that is taken captive, kidnapped, and brought to a strange country, Babylon. Now, presently, we as Christians in the culture in which we live, we're surrounded by a hostile culture as well. We are bombarded by the attitudes, the beliefs, the values, the norms of the culture around us, and they are hostile to Christianity. If we were to rewind, like say 70 years, that would take us to about 1950, right after the Second World War had been over for a few years. That was the height of church attendance in North America, United States and Canada combined. Actually worldwide, that was the height of church attendance in terms of the general culture in the population. Now, 70 years later, it's a different world. We are living in a post-Christian culture. Now, not a culture without Christianity. That could be called a pagan culture, or like a first world culture. And then we've got the culture of 70 years ago, which arguably would be like a Christian culture. Now, 70 years later, in 2020, what we are is a post-Christian culture. That's not a culture without Christianity. That's a culture against Christianity. And what we are needing to face is this concept that the culture around us, just like Babylon of years and years ago, is filled with anti-Christian, post-Christian, anti-Christian sentiments and values, and to believe them is to absorb the idols of our day. Oh, they're not little wooden idols that we worship in some little corner in our rooms. They're idols of the heart. They're idols embedded in our culture, and they all are competing for the love of our hearts. They're all competing for the lordship of Jesus.
Enter the world of the most resilient young Christians and learn how they are sustaining faith.
Find hope in what God is doing among young Christians today.
For the last 3 years, we've been working on a major new research study trying to understand what helps young Christians be resilient in their faith. We're excited to launch this new project called Faith for Exiles, 5 ways for a new generation to follow Jesus in digital Babylon. Learn why the biblical concept of exile is the right framework for growing deep, resilient faith. I've been working on this project with my friend Mark Mallock, and he's got a long experience of working with this next generation. And so our heart behind this whole project was really to try to deliver some good news, some solutions, some practical ideas behind engaging the heart of this new generation. Discover 5 research-based practices that cultivate faithfulness in our digital post-Christian context.
You know, it's really easy to focus on what the church is doing wrong. There's an endless list of those things. But what is the church doing right, and how does that contribute to faith formation? As a parent, as a leader working with the next generation, that's the question I'm always asking myself. Am I doing the right things?
We hear a lot of people complain about millennials, about Gen Z, but this new project has given me a lot of hope in this next generation of young Christians.
In my work, it's not just about understanding the times, it's also knowing what to do. We want to give you practical help to actually build disciples in this current cultural context.
So it's cool to be able to work with you again on this brand new project, and we hope that this new study gives you insights to turn into action in your ministry and in your context.
Well, idols can take root in our heart, and here we are, exiles in this culture around us that is against Christianity. And we can stop for a moment. Someone may think, wait a minute, are you trying to tell me that you've got idols and I've got idols, and how in the world are we having idols? I don't have any idols. And you may look at me and say, Jim, you're a Christian, you're a pastor, you can't have any idols in your heart. And what I would want to say to you is this. Well, actually, it's pretty hard not to have idols in your heart, because, just excuse me for a second here. You know what, no matter what you think, when you're surrounded by idols, it's like this huge river, this river of the culture that we are swimming in. And we've got 7 different tributaries, and we talked about them earlier: arts, entertainment, government, business, family, especially mass media, religion, but especially mass media. You can't help but be influenced by culture. For example, if I were to tell you that eating these little chocolate bars, I figure they're just so small, just so little. They're not big chocolate bars, they're little chocolate bars. I know it's not really polite to eat in front of people. I'm so sorry. So if I'm just going to eat 10 or 20 of these every day, no matter what I want, I'm going to gain weight and get sick. In the same sense, as soon as I start to look at my screens all day long and take in the entertainment, take in all of the news, take in all of the things that it's telling me, I am going to be changed and affected whether I like it or not. Just like my body is going to get sick if I take all of those chocolate bars, as small as they are, every day. If I have a life where I am having unguarded screen time, I'm going to get sick too mentally, and it's going to affect how I think. No doubt about it. What's going to happen is that, unbeknownst to me, idols will be set up in my heart and mind, because I'm listening to the values that are being brought to me every single day. Well, I'd like to look at perhaps what might be one of the biggest idols in our culture, the idol of sexuality. Now, I can say I'm a Christian and I love Jesus, and Jesus is the Lord of my life, except for my money. Or Jesus is the Lord of my life, except when I get really stressed and then I get angry at people, but that should be okay. Jesus is the Lord of my life, except in the area of sexuality. Well, all of those different things represent areas that are in competition with Jesus' love and with Jesus' lordship. Sexuality, of course, in our culture, just a huge idol. One of the reasons is because sex is so powerful and such a beautiful gift designed by God. My wife Carrie and I, we have a ministry, and it's called The Intimate Couple. It is all about intimacy, helping young people getting ready for marriage and helping married couples. Well, we talk about the intimacy iceberg, and when most people hear intimacy, they think sex. And so flashing up here a picture of an iceberg, and what we have there at the top is sex, sexual intimacy. But that's, in this diagram, the tip of the iceberg. What people don't understand is the value, the weight, the mass of the iceberg is found underneath the surface, and that's where intellectual, emotional, and spiritual intimacy is. In most people's mind, spiritual intimacy is way, way at the bottom, if it exists at all. Now, in God's economy, this iceberg looks like this. The top, the tip of the iceberg is the spiritual. That's the most important thing. That's the thing that needs to be there first, the thing that's visible to God first. And underneath that is emotional intimacy and intellectual intimacy, and actually sexual intimacy is the least important of all 4 of those different components. And the reason is because true intimacy doesn't come through sex. True intimacy comes from a relationship with Christ. In fact, you don't have to be involved in a sexual relationship. You don't have to be married in order to have all of the intimacy that you're longing for, because it's found in relationship. Well, I could talk about just a pretend story, a little pretense here. Before I got married, let's pretend I had 3 girlfriends. And for each girlfriend, I would take pictures with them and selfies, and I saved the pictures, and I kept them in a little box. And when I got married, well, Carrie became my wife, and I didn't date any of the girls anymore, but I kept a little box. And every time I get disappointed, every time I get kind of frustrated, I go into my little box and I pull out one of the cards and I look at one of the pictures and I remember, and I think of how good it was. And well, if I actually did that, that would not speak very well for what's going to happen in my marriage. But isn't that really what idolatry is like, where my sincere love for Christ is compromised by my affection for my independence, or my affection for what money can give me, or my affection for my sexuality outside of God's will for my life, and I can go on and on and on. So idols make such a difference in our lives. They bring corrosion to our soul. Well, let's look at Psalm 137, and there we have the historical reference to exiles in Babylon in 586 BC. And they were brought there, and the culture ground them to dust, just decimating their identity, their worship of God. Their culture was overrun by the Babylonian culture. And this is how they responded. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. We hung our harps on the willows. That's a sign of abject hopelessness. When our captors required of us a song. How can we sing a song of Zion when we dwell in a strange land? Total despair, sickness of heart and mind and soul. But at the same time, there was someone else. We find that story recorded in Ezekiel chapter 1. And there, this young man, Ezekiel, who was also taken as an exile, put into Babylon under the same pressures as all of the others that we just read about in Psalm 137. This is what he said in chapter 1, verse 1 of the book that he wrote. While I was among the exiles by the river Kibar, the heavens were open, and I saw visions of God. And that, my friend, is what worship is all about. Worship is about opening our hearts and our minds, our souls to Jesus and his love, hearing him say that we are his beloved, being enraptured by his presence, and also being able to say, Lord, would you shine a light in my heart, in my mind? Is there something in competition with your lordship? Is there something in me that's in competition with my devoted love for you? Is there's something that is pulling my heart to put trust and love in it? Lord, help me to see it and to remove it. In Jesus' name. What a great way for us to end today and to understand that, we may be in the midst of a culture that's against God, a culture that, unless we are careful, unless we are monitoring and filtering all of the things that are coming to us through the screens and all the different other ways that culture comes to us, unless we are guarding our hearts, we're going to be impacted, and the result is going to be these idols of the culture are set up in our hearts. Isn't it any wonder that the Apostle John, in the conclusion of his first letter, First John chapter 5, the last thing that he says, after speaking 5 chapters worth of truth about the love of God to people, he says this, little children, guard your hearts from idols. And we can do that. And the best way for us to do it, to resist the idols of our culture, is to re-experience what worship is all about. And I'd like to ask you this week, every single day, would you carve out time? Would you put your devices away, screens away? Would you find a quiet place where you're not going to be interrupted And will you just worship Jesus? Open your heart and mind to Him and to the power of His Spirit, and ask Him if there's anything that needs to be adjusted or changed so that you are free in guarding your heart and mind from idols. God bless you. Have a great week. Thank you so much. Bye now.